كما قدر يكون الذي لغيرك لن يصل إليك والذي قسم لك حصيل لديك فاشترك والذي عليك في فرض الحقيقة والشرع المصون لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون شارع المصطفى الهادي بشير ختم الأنبياء البادر المنير صلى الله عليه الرب القدير ما ريح الصبا مالت بالغصون لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله.
أحسن الله إليك فتح عليك. Do you need to do that? Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم فقد نوينا التعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How is everyone doing? MashaAllah. How is the bitter cold of Makanji treating you? MashaAllah. Anyone here from more tropical regions? You've been here long enough. You're Makanjian now. MashaAllah. This is really probably the coldest day since the fall started. May Allah give us all afiyah, inshaAllah. Bismillah. So before getting started with the specific topic, I just wanted to frame what we're going to do today in two things. Because, well, the first of it, and some of this is kind of echoing what the other shuyukh have mentioned, that a lot of times I am tasked with more fiqh discussions, which tend to be more rules and regulations and halal and haram and do's and don'ts. And sometimes it's perceived, not intentionally, but sometimes it can come off as kind of restrictive, right? Or a lot of rules and regulations. Some people get kind of put off by that there's a sort of constriction that's involved, or Islam is strict or something like this. And it's really important to have the proper framework on understanding what fiqh is, what the sacred law is. Because without that proper framework, then one could easily feel like that. They could feel that this is restrictive, that everyone else is having fun, I can't do this, I can't do that. Right? And part of that is technically true. I wouldn't use that same verbiage to describe it, but the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir," that the dunya, the life of this world, is the prison for the believer, and it is the paradise for the non-believer. And part of the idea of the sijn, right, the prison, is that there's restriction. Right? You have to be a certain place at a certain time. You can't do certain things. Right? You don't have all of that kind of latitude to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Right? Which, even though it sounds like we would want that, is not what's good for us. Right? And even though the other part of the hadith, that this is the Jannah of the kafir, meaning there's no restrictions whatsoever for those who don't ascribe to Islam, right, or to the sacred law, but that does not necessarily equate to that being good for them. Right? Just like in the parable of the river is really important, because the river, without the two banks to restrict its course, it'll just go everywhere. There's no, right, there will be no flowing, there will be no benefits to the river. It would just be a flood. Right? And many people, even though they seem to be happy because they are living without restriction and they're able to do whatever they want, whenever they want, many times they just end up being all over the place, and they don't have any guidance or structure to life, nor do they have any standards by which they could judge whether they're succeeding or not, or whether they're achieving their goals or not. So I wanted to mention, to speak out what the definition of the sacred law is, according to the scholars. So they mentioned that the sacred law is wad'un ilahiyyun, it is a divine guidance, sa'iqun lidhawil uqul, that is brought to those of sound mind, bikhtiyarihim iyahu, that by their voluntarily adopting it, it will guide them to the most sound and wholesome life in this world and the greatest success in the next. So the sacred law is meant to guide a person to not just the best in the next world, but also the best possible life in this world, inwardly and outwardly, personally, familially, socially, and every level of aspect of life. And this applies on a broader scale to humanity as well, right? The best social life as well. Right? And understanding that this is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we have the sacred law. One of the greatest blessings of having the sacred law, first and foremost, and also having an opportunity to study it in a deeper way, is that you can never find yourself in any situation, regardless of how rare the occurrence is, except that there is clear guidance from Allah on what to do in that situation. That there is no situation you could think of except that there is knowledge in our sacred law, in our tradition, to tell you exactly what you need to do in that moment. Right? And one of the hardest things as a convert, many years ago, getting older, is the confusion of not knowing what Allah wants. The confusion of not knowing what Allah wants from me at any particular moment was extremely heavy and extremely difficult, because so-and-so is saying, so-and-so is saying, do this, right? And they're very sincere, and they really want what's good for me. They're telling me, you have to do it this way. Right? And then someone else who's equally sincere and equally wants what's good for me is saying the opposite thing. Now I'm left, right, completely perplexed. I don't know what to do now. Okay, who do I follow? And this person's saying, don't listen to them, right? They're deviants. And this person's saying, don't listen to them. And it's just, it's one of the hardest things is to be confused, right? And that is not due to Islam, that is due to our lack of knowledge of the sacred law. So the more that we increase in knowledge, the easier Islam gets, right? The more that we increase in knowledge, the more clarity we have in every moment. Even though it is perceived the other way around, like the more you learn, the more you're restricted, the more you have to apply. That's not true. So first and foremost, Allah gave us this sacred law as a mercy to us. This is for our own benefit, our own good, right? And Allah doesn't need us. Allah does not need our obedience. Allah does not benefit by our obedience. Allah is not harmed by our disobedience. It is solely for our benefit and the benefit of all of humanity. And this is part of the mercy for which the Prophet ﷺ was sent, as a mercy to the world. Part of it was the sacred law. Tamam. The second point that I wanted to talk about is, branching off of that, the sacred law, usually they break it down into 5 aspects of the sacred law. There's personal law, there's business law, there's family law, social law, which is the broader social, and you could say that's similar to civil law or communal law, and then political law. 4 out of the 5 of those have to do with other people. 4 out of the 5 aspects of the sacred law have to do with other people, right? And this is part of the goal of the sacred law, to bring everything into balance into the world. That justice, true justice, is only possible with revelation. And Imam al-Busayri, when he's describing the miraculousness of the Quran, he says, وَكَالصِّرَاطِ وَكَالْمِيزَانِ مَعْدِلَةً, that it is in its ability to establish justice, like the traverse over the hellfire and the scales of the Day of Judgment. فَالْقِسْطُ مِنْ غَيْرِهَا لِلنَّاسِ لَمْ يَقُمِ, that true justice without the Quran, without revelation, is impossible to have in humanity. It's not possible. Right, so justice is extremely important, right? To have everything balanced, everyone's rights and responsibilities fully fleshed out in such a clear way that no one has an excuse to transgress against another person. But the justice is not the goal. The justice is the minimum. It's a bare minimum requirement. And this applies to our personal aspect as well. The letter of the law is the minimum by which we should hold ourselves as a standard, as a minimum standard, that we would not go below that. However, Allah says in the Quran, and this is the verse that's commonly used in the Jum'ah khutbah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى, إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ, that Allah commands towards justice and ihsan, excellence. Right, so justice is a minimum, but we're really being called to excellence. Excellence is above and beyond that minimum, right? So it's not just pure rights and responsibilities. Right? I don't have to do that. That's not my responsibility. Oh, you don't get that. That's not your right. That's my right. Right? That is a very low level, and that is not a healthy society, even though it is better than the alternative. Right? But Allah is calling us to excellence. Excellence is to go above and beyond in giving other people their rights, and to pardon and excuse people for not giving us our rights, right? And there's obviously limits to that, right? So this ihsan, the Prophet ﷺ described in probably the shortest hadith that we have. It's only 2 words. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-Dīnu nasiha." The religion is nasiha. Now, nasiha is one of those Arabic words that will never be able to be translated in English, because out of the myriad of meanings that it has, once you translate it, you have to choose one, unless you're going to write a full paragraph as a translation. So nasiha generally is translated as giving sincere advice, right? The religion is giving sincere advice. That's the usual translation you would get. But the scholars, they mention that nasiha really relates to wanting the greatest good for absolutely every person, and doing everything that we have in our ability to realize that for them, to bring that about for them. Now that applies to every person, right? Not just my friends, right? Not just people I know, but it applies to friends and enemies. It applies to strangers and allies, family, and other. So every other person. There's a little test. We don't really have time to really do this and ask your results and stuff like that. But think about it. Imam Abu al-Harith al-Muhasibi, he mentions about nasiha. He said that the true test of whether what level of nasiha you have or I have in my religious practice is that if you were to think that if Allah allowed all of the affairs of the world to go in accordance to what's in your heart right now, what would the state of everyone be? What would the state of your friends be? What would the state of your enemies be? What would the state of your allies be? Your neighbors, your strangers, people you don't know? What would the state of the affairs of the world be? Right now, if we did this with the Prophet ﷺ, if everything, right, if the divine will and power and volition was in accordance entirely to what is in the heart of the Prophet, everybody would be in Firdaus al-A'la, the highest levels of paradise. There would be no one else in the rest of Jannah. Right? He wanted absolutely the best outcome for absolutely everybody. Right, with no exception. In the Battle of Badr, when swords are being carried, right, the Prophet wanted for Abu Jahl the highest levels of Fir'aun, the highest levels of Firdaus, apologies, even though Abu Jahl was trying to kill him. Right? At no time did the Prophet ﷺ wants Abu Jahl to go to hell. Right? He wanted the best outcome for absolutely everyone. And that's really the idea of nasiha. And even Imam al-Harith al-Muhasibi, he goes on to say that if that is any less than that outcome in your heart, then you have something to work on. Right? You and I as well, are deficient in that portion of our deen. Because the Prophet said the religion itself is nasiha, meaning a most crucial part of the religion is to have this care and concern for everyone. Now, second practicum, right? This one is a little more comical, but imagine you're walking down the street and you see another person. They got this giant triple stack ice cream cone, right? So they're extremely distracted, but while they're walking, trying to make sure it's not dripping and trying to keep it balanced in the air. And they're walking towards a hole in the ground. Say a sewer or a sinkhole or some sort of manhole is open, and they're walking towards it. What would you do? Maybe we can take one or two suggestions while I drink some water. What would you do? Yeah, brother? Shout at them. Okay. Mm-hmm. Tell them to watch out for the ice cream or the hole. Probably both. Right. Anyone else? There's consensus pretty much on that. We would definitely intervene. Okay. Would we hesitate? Right? Would we hesitate thinking like, I don't want to offend them? Maybe this will be a little harsh. I don't think I should say something, right? Right? Would we do that? Definitely not, right? Would we ignore it? Just say, I got my own problems. Right? Right? No, we wouldn't, right? Because nasiha would dictate that we have to say something. We have to intervene. We can't just let this person, and this is completely beyond religion, right? We're not talking about religion. This is part of the fitrah. This is the human nature, right? That somebody who would be able to just ignore that, there's something wrong with them, right? Not on a religious standpoint, but just in a human standpoint. Their humanity is at question. And this idea, I don't want to offend them, right? And usually that just goes out of the picture because of the urgency of the situation, right? Same thing with a child who's about to touch the stove, right? Even somebody who doesn't spank their children or something is going to slap that hand away, right? Not because they're harsh people, because because of nasiha, because they have this extreme desire for the well-being of that person. They don't want to see them get hurt. So if we take this outward physical example of somebody falling into the hole, they could get extremely injured, right? They could die in a physical sense, right? But if we think about it in the bigger picture of this world and the hereafter, both of them in consideration, right? There are people who are living their life in contrast to what's best for them, in contrast to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with regarding the sacred law. Right? And part of it is that not only are they risking by means of that potentially a bad outcome in the next life, right? Hellfire does exist, right? But they're also missing out on the greatest good in this life and the next. So it's not just averting the negative, they're missing out on acquiring such great good. So, right, if we were to be in that state and that urgency for somebody who's about to fall into a hole, right, in the dunya, what about someone who's heading towards the hellfire, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that my example and the example of you is like a person who lit a fire, and then all of a sudden the moths and the insects, the moths, started going directly into the fire. And he said that I am grabbing you by your waists, right, and pulling you back from the fire, right, and you're slipping from my hands. That he's trying to, right, just like the person swatting away these moths not to go into the fire, right, the same thing the Prophet ﷺ is doing that for us because of nasiha, because he wants what's best for us and all. Right, so if we have these two vantage points, the Sharia is for our benefits. It's for the benefit of humanity. It's for the benefit of everyone. Right, and these people saying like, oh, Sharia law is like evil and all these things, like they don't know what Sharia law is. Right, much of our civil law is actually taken from Sharia law. Right, and if you go to I believe it's the City Hall in Washington D.C., they have in the rotundum all of the different influences to the civil law, the Constitution that we have. Right? And amongst them is this statue of an Arab man with a book in one hand and a sword in another. Right? Now, some people say that that's a statue of the Prophet Muhammad. Right? It's very respectful. Right? It's not something to, it's not something demeaning or anything. But look at it. It's just an acknowledgement that the Sharia has an impact on our civil law. Anyone who studied business law knows that the majority of our rulings in the sacred law are reflected in the civil law as well. So from this vantage point, we're going to jump into what is essentially a list of do's and don'ts, right? A list of halal and haram. And these are things that are very common, that happen all around us, but we may be reticent or reluctant to speak out against them. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that we should just now become some sort of like religious hall monitors, right? Waving the haram finger at everyone, right? No, that's not the point here, but we do need to understand that calling to good and forbidding the evil is just the same exact thing that you did with that guy with the ice cream walking towards the hole, right? And that is the same idea, except that the hole is a tangible thing that we can see with our eyes. The hellfire is something that we believe in our hearts. Right? And the certainty that we have of the existence of hellfire and the existence of paradise that someone could be missing out on, right? It should be even stronger than our perception of that hole that a person could be walking into. So Imam al-Ghazali, in this part of the chapter on, or the book of commanding the good and forbidding the evil, he has a section called al-Munkarat al-Ma'lufa, the wrongful actions that are commonplace, that are a custom, right, that people have become accustomed to. And then he breaks it up into kind of subcategories. Common wrongs that you may see in the masjid, common wrongs that you may see in the marketplace, common wrongs that you may see in other public areas, and so forth. So we'll just go through this, inshallah, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and stuff. So the first category is common wrongs that one may see in the masjid. Now, just to understand, the masjid is a sacred place of worship. So anything that either violates the sanctity of the masjid or distracts people who choose to worship, right, is in itself a munkar. It's a wrong. Right, and it can be sinful. It can be haram. It could be makruh. It could be any of those levels of impermissibility. So the first one that he mentions is seeing someone praying incorrectly. That you go to the masjid and you see somebody performing the prayer in a manner that is incorrect or invalid. Now we have an example directly of this from the Prophet ﷺ, where a man came in and prayed, and the Prophet ﷺ said, go back and pray because you did not pray, meaning the prayer was not valid. And the man went back and prayed again. And then he said again, go back and pray because you did not pray. And then the third time, look at the beautiful etiquettes that they had. The man said, teach me how to pray. Like, I don't know how to do it. Teach me how to pray. Right? And Imam Ghazali, he brings a narration. He says, "Man ra'a musi'an fi salati fasakata alayhi fahuwa sharikuhu." That whoever sees someone praying incorrectly and does not say anything, then they are a party to that sin. Now, this is really important to understand. Matters of difference of opinion amongst the scholars is not what is meant here. Right? Because somebody may pray in a way that is different than the madhab that you follow or the school that you follow, because there are many valid ways to pray, and even the Prophet ﷺ, his prayer differed throughout his life. Right, well, there's slight changes in the way that he held his hands, or slight changes in certain of the tertiary things that he did in the prayer. However, the things that are unanimous in the prayer, like for instance, somebody completely missed the sajda, or they've been praying, they say they took shahada a year ago, and the whole time they've been praying, they just only do one sajda. Right? According to all of the scholars, that would be invalid. Now, that doesn't mean we yell at them, say, "Astaghfirullah, bro, this is the worst prayer I've ever seen." Like, no, we go with care and concern, right? Because maybe he just doesn't know, right? Maybe he never learned it, right? But intervening somehow is what the obligation is, right? It doesn't mean that we have to yell at it, because the Prophet ﷺ said, if you see a wrong, then change it with your, what's the first one? Your hand. No, I think tongue's first, right? With your tongue, right? And if you cannot do that, then with your, is it hand first? No, hand is first, right? Hand, change it with your hand, and if you cannot do that, then change it with your tongue. And if you cannot do that, then change it with your heart. Now, the key word here, the most important word here is change it. Don't just yell at it. Don't just yell it out. Wrong. Right? No, that's not what's meant. Right? Telling people that what they're doing is haram, right, is not what's meant. Right? Usually people know that what they're doing is haram. Changing it would demand taking certain steps to cure the situation, to solve the underlying problem. And this applies to other worships as well, right? So if you see somebody fasting, if it's Ramadan and they're an able-bodied person who should be fasting, and you see them eating or something, right? Maybe you can tell them. Maybe it's the first day Ramadan, and they just by habit they started eating lunch at a certain time, and they didn't realize that, oh, this is actually Ramadan now. Right? They're not accustomed to that yet. Right? This could apply to zakat. It could apply to hajj. It could apply to umrah. You go to the Kaaba and someone's going the other direction. Right? Everyone's walking, what is it, counterclockwise? Right? This guy's walking clockwise. Right? Right? So you would say something, right? Because that's not valid, according to the scholars. The second one he says is someone praying with impurity on their clothes that they are unaware of. Right? So somebody has, say, blood on their back or something like that. And of course, obviously, there's fiqh discussions on what exactly is impurity or not. But another example, maybe more relevant, say you have a friend, right, he goes to make wudu, right? Then you both go and pray. You prayed behind him in the saf behind him. And then you see that on his foot there's this giant piece of tape, some duct tape stuck to the bottom of his foot, right? Or he's got a spot of paint on his foot. And now paint is a barrier that the water would not get through, right? So you can tell him, like, look, you have some paint on your foot, right? I'm assuming that you weren't painting after you made wudu, right? So maybe you have to repeat your prayer. The next one, he says, someone praying towards the wrong qibla, the wrong direction of prayer, due to darkness, blindness, or a lack of knowledge. Now this could happen a lot in places that are not masjids. Usually a masjid has some sort of distinguishable symbol or something that would make you know where the direction of prayer is, right? Like you have some sort of background or some sort of artwork. Like this picture here actually says, فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. It actually says qibla on the wall. We will turn you to a qibla that you are pleased with, is a verse of the Quran. Right? But if you're praying at like JFK Terminal 4, right, this little kind of communal prayer area, right, it's not always that obvious. The last one he mentions about this specific is someone's aura is showing, someone's a portion of their body that is legally required to cover during the prayer is showing. And some schools are stricter than others, right? So someone follows the Shafi'i school, like even one single hair or even a little bit of the awra would affect the prayer. So you can tell them quickly, like, look, your hair is showing, or this or that, and help them to pray their prayer in a way that is valid. The second one is incorrect recitation of the Quran. Now, this only applies to major mistakes. Major mistakes are changing a letter from one letter to another letter, changing a vowel to a different vowel, adding a adding a letter that doesn't belong there, detracting a letter that is supposed to be there, and so on and so forth. The science of tajweed has more details on it. So if someone is saying, instead of قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, they're saying قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Instead of say, oh you disbelievers, they're saying eat, oh disbelievers. Right? And there's many common mistakes like this, right? لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Right? Instead of لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ means I definitely worship what you worship, oh disbelievers. Instead of saying I do not worship what you worship. Right, so some of these things, these are major mistakes, and it is obligatory for us to learn that much of the Quran, of tajweed, of recitation of the Quran, to be able to remove those major mistakes, to read properly. The minor mistakes are things that do with the beauty, like the stretches and the ikhfa and the idgham, the tonation of the letters. So if you hear somebody who's reciting incorrectly, Imam al-Ghazali is saying that it is that we have to intervene, right? We have to say something. Now, this has to be with a lot of wisdom, because the level of religious literacy in America is unfortunately not as high as many other places. So it is much more common here for people to read the Quran incorrectly, or to pray incorrectly than other places, and that must be taken into consideration when a person is approaching this situation. So 100% the encouragement must be wise, right? It has to be with wisdom, encouraging to learn, maybe even offering to teach. Because if someone really wanted what's good for that person, they wouldn't just say, you're reading wrong, and walk out. Right? They would take whatever steps that they could to realize for that person that thing that's best for them. Right? So it might be taking some time out of our own schedule to sit with them and teach them tajweed, right? Or to teach them what we know, or to offer them to take or tell them about any local classes or so forth. Right? Now, if someone really has a difficulty in doing it, they've been trying to learn and it's just hard for them, then you just let them be. That's a different story. So it's not because of neglect or lack of knowledge in that case. The next one, again, I told you this is just a long list of of things that are haram. But he says that the improper calling of the adhan. Now this one. So, and he gives some details, right? Excessive lengthening, right? So you go to make wudu, and they started, right? They started with Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu Allah. Then you go to make wudu, and you come back, and they just said Illallah, right? They've been stretching. They stretched it excessively long, that it's such a long adhan. Many of the scholars dislike that, and even in the books of fiqh, they mentioned that excessive lengthening is not what's meant. The Prophet ﷺ did not have a very long adhan called. Right now, some places they're more accustomed to that than others. But if it goes beyond what's customarily understood, then someone should say something, right? Especially if that person is an appointed person by the masjid, or they're just a community member or something. And especially if the stretches or the elongations are in the wrong place. Now this is actually similar to the rules of the Quran. This is sinful because it changes the meaning, right? And the adhan would have to be repeated, right? So if someone said Allahu Akbar, that's a question: is Allah great? Right? That's not a statement. Right? Or if someone said Allahu Akbar, right? That's another question, or someone saying Allahu Akbar, right? Akbar is actually one of the names of shaitan in the language of Arabic. Right? They would use that name for idols, because once you add that alif, it's a different word. Right? So these are very problematic. So definitely someone should say. Probably the most consequential one, though, is the calling the adhan at the wrong time, incorrect time. Now, in Ramadan, this is very, very, very dangerous, and I've seen it. I've seen like clearly the wall clock, even in the masjid, not even like a person's own app or something. The wall clock in the masjid says a certain time, and the mu'adhin starts calling the adhan 2 minutes before Maghrib, and people are eating. Right? And people are now breaking their fast because of that adhan. Right? Or similarly, someone called the adhan late at Fajr time, when people are depending on the masjid's adhan to start their fasting. And then he says another, calling adhan a second time. The adhan has already been called, and then somebody else who didn't know starts calling. You can tell them, look, the adhan is already called. Don't need multiple adhans. And some masjids, they have signs that you would flip it once the adhan is called. Now, some of these things, it's not the person's himself that you may have to speak to. It may be the masjid administration, because it's their responsibility to appoint somebody to do it who's going to do it properly. And similar for leading the salah, that it's the masjid's responsibility to appoint somebody to lead the salah that everyone else's can trust that their prayer is valid behind. Next thing that relates to the masjid is innovative lecturers. Allahu Akbar. This is someone who is preaching or teaching innovative things, sinful beliefs, or just in general inappropriate or harmful speech, right? That is either inappropriate for the people who are present, or just inappropriate in general. And it's not permissible to attend such lectures, to actually sit and listen. It would not be permissible. One's options are either get up and leave, which there's many examples of that in the Sharia, right? Or to say something. Now, I was in Darul Mustafa in Yemen, and it was a kind of an off time that the students were sitting around revising, and some person just randomly grabbed the mic, turned on the speaker system, and started giving a talk, very inappropriate talk. Right? And this is all just students there. There's no, the general public is not there at this time. So one of the other teachers, they just turned off the microphone so no one can hear it. So he's just talking into a mic that's not working. Right? But it was important because, right, letting people they would assume that, especially those who are in charge of masjids and religious facilities, they're assuming that whoever you're putting up there is someone to take from, as someone who is an authority, as someone who is that I can trust, right? And if that's not the case, then they should not be put up. They should not be allowed to speak without that permission. The last two things go back to what we mentioned in the beginning, that the masjid is a place of sanctity, right, and focus. Right? There's a sacred place for worship. Anything that would be a violation of the sanctity of the place, right, or a distraction to those who choose to worship, right, must not occur in the masjid. And this is essentially the reason for the gender separation, right, is that it is a place of focus. It's not a place for our carnal desires to be in any way, shape, or form stirred up. So any means that is, take all the kind of logistics of the masjid world are based on that. Technically, the prayer would be valid if it was done a different way, but logistically, right, this is best for focus. Distractions in the masjid. So he says selling merchandise in the masjid. Now, two parties can agree on a sale in the masjid, but the actual item of sale cannot be in the masjid. Right? You can't have a table set up in the masjid. Now the hallways of the masjid, the courtyard of the masjid, that's a different story. But the actual prayer area of the masjid it is not permissible to have business transactions where the item of sale is present. They also mentioned begging. Now, some places customarily, after Jum'ah, people would stand up and kind of have some sort of ask or pitch, and then people would just leave them because it's short, it's very brief, right? And in some places, people are in very, very difficult need. So this is time or place. Circumstantially, you might not intervene in such cases. But in general, this is not the place for that. Right? This is not the place for that. Outside the masjid or outside the prayer area is there. Announcements of lost items. There's actually, so someone's like, excuse me, everyone, in the masjid there's a class going on or something, or people are reading Quran, some people are praying. Excuse me, everyone, has anyone seen my iPhone charger? Right? This is not the place for that. Right? This is not the place for that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he actually made a dua, right? What is it? La yahdika Allahu ila dhalatik, or something right, like that. May Allah let you, may you not find what you've lost. Right? It wasn't because of the ask, it was because it was done in the masjid. Similarly, the business transaction, may la rabiha Allahu tijaratak, right? May you not profit from your transaction. Children excessively playing in the masjid. Now, a little playing in the masjid is allowed, right? And it happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ allowed it to happen. He even allowed it off times of the masjid. He allowed Hassan and Hussein to wrestle in the masjid. But if it's excessive and it is distracting, then that is not to be allowed to go on. Say, oh, I don't want to offend them. Right? No. Right? This is nasiha. They need to learn the etiquette of the masjid as well. They need to learn the sanctity of the place. But it doesn't mean that any kid that's just like playing with a little car by himself in the corner, that we can go and yell at them. Right? This is a masjid, you can't pray, you can't play. That's not the case. And also special occasions, right? If it's Eid or something like that, right? It's off time, no one's in the masjid, there's no one particularly praying, right? Then we can be a little bit more lenient in that regard. We should want the children to be, to like coming to the masjid. And that is important. And sometimes we have to kind of chill out a little bit. And children they're playful. And for them to stand for 5 minutes in salah is really hard. For some adults, it's hard. Violation of the sanctity of the masjid, he lists anyone who may make the masjid impure. So anyone who's bringing anything in the masjid that could cause the masjid to become impure. Right? So this could be a child with a diaper, right? That is a full diaper. This is problematic, and they're sitting without any other layers of clothing or something, and they're sitting on the carpets. And he also mentions bringing in foul smells. It's actually makruh to eat raw onions and then go and pray in the masjid, right? To eat something with foul, because it would distract the people next to you in the prayer. Now, what would be our raw onions today? Cigarettes, maybe, right? Could be. Or someone has if someone had like their iftar or something, they can quickly brush their teeth and then go to pray, right? So as not to distract the people next to them. And also any foul actions or any inappropriate behavior. He mentioned specifically a drunk person. Now, it is not impermissible for a drunk person to be in the masjid, right? But if they are distracting, if they are doing foul things or they're acting inappropriately, right, or there's a possibility that they may vomit, right, then they're not allowed in the masjid. Right? But if they are just intoxicated or inebriated and they're not distracting anyone, right, they are welcome in the masjid. Right? It's not about, right, just like the hospital is for the sick. Right? We should allow anyone and everyone who is willing to uphold the sanctity of the masjid and respect it in what is customarily known. We should let anyone come into the masjid in that case, with that condition. He also extends this to people with uncontrolled mental health issues. And now they're not sinful for this, right? They're not accountable for this, right? But it may not be, maybe at different times of the day when there's less people or something. But it is not, there's no sin in regards to it, but their caregivers should not bring them at times that would be distracting to others. Now, if there's people who have mental health issues and they can sit still, they can act in a way that's not distracting, right? Some mild forms of autism, even major forms of levels of autism, sometimes they can be still and not distracting, and then marhaba, the doors are open, because the reason is the distractingness, or the distraction, not the sickness itself. Cell phones ringing. Right? Put your phones on don't put your phones vibrate. Put them on do not disturb. Right? That's what takbir means. Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater, absolutely greater than that text message. Right? Do not disturb, because if vibrating in your pocket, it's distracting you. It's not distracting other people, so it doesn't fall under this. Right? But it will distract you. And this is the most demonic invention of our time. Now your wrist vibrates. It's even worse. You have one on your leg, then you have one on your wrist a couple minutes later. Right? It's very, very distracting. Also, you can add a bunch of other things. Someone's really jingling their keys around on their finger while people are praying. Right? And I'm sure you all probably could add to this list, right? Many things that you've seen that are bothersome. Someone reciting Quran very loudly while other people are trying to pray. Now, it's permissible to recite Quran audibly, right? But if it's excessively loud, it will distract others. It's a shared space. Everyone has the rights to a place of worship that is conducive to focus. Tamam. So that's the masjid. The marketplace. Now, the underlying meaning of the marketplace, really, this contextually may be a little bit different here, because most of these things apply to what's known as an Islamic marketplace or a marketplace in a Muslim country, but it could apply to Muslim-owned stores. You could say that it applies to that, or in a civil law sense, it could apply to all the stores, right? Even so, if there's non-Muslims who own a store and are doing things that are illegal, right, you could extend it to that as well. The non-Muslims in general, there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars, are not obliged to follow the details of the sacred law until they first accept belief, and then the rest of the Sharia would be applicable to them. But if there's Muslim-owned stores on these things, selling impermissible items, right? Pork, wine, lottery tickets, intoxicants, etc., any deceptive transactions, right? And it would be a requirement for us to warn those who are being deceived, right? So the customers who are being deceived by this specific owner, right? It's part of our duty for nasiha and as humans, right, to warn them. So a deceptive transaction could be, for instance, someone selling a product based on a lie. Someone selling a product based on a lie. So that could be stolen items, counterfeit items, right, or what we used to call bootlegged items. You got the Air Jordans, but the hand actually has fingers. I've seen it. I've seen a watch in India. Instead of Rolex, it said relax. No kidding. I remember it clear as day. All right, so selling that under the guise that it's a real Rolex, right, that would be sinful. Right? Obviously, if someone says like imitation or something like this, they're not attempting to claim it as the authentic product. That's different. Intentionally concealing the flaws of an item of sale. It is an obligation on the seller to disclose any flaws in the item of sale. Right? So if they're hiding, right, that they sell you a car, but they don't let you know that the certain parts of the car do not work, right? Then that would be sinful unless they disclosed it or they sold it as is, right? That is permissible as well. Corrupt conditions in the contract or wrongful practices in the contract that are common are, if the contract is invalid, then the sale is unlawful and the money acquired from that sale is unlawful. And it is obligatory for both parties to rectify the sale. So not establishing a price. It's like, bro, I'll sell you my car, How much? Don't worry, I'll take care of you. You agree? Right? That sale is impermissible. It's haram to do that type of sale, right? Because later on, when they go to trade or transfer the item of sale and the money, the guy's like, "What is this? $1,000? What is this?" He said, "I thought you hooked me up." Like, hook up means 10,000. Or you hand over the other 9, right? Also unclarity in terms of the contract. This happens all the time when hiring contractors. I hire somebody to paint my house in 3 days, right? 3 days come, they only did half the house, they're asking for their money, right? And they're saying that you said the agreement was on the 3 days, right? Assuming that I could paint the house in 3 days. And you're saying, no, the agreement was on painting the whole house. If it takes you more than 3 days, you have to do more than 3 days, right? And now there's an argument. Right, so unclarity in the terms of the contract, and then other things like usurious sales or deceptive sales and so forth. Right, this is not necessarily a fiqh class, but obviously the goal is to change the wrong. Right, so many times these are symptoms of an underlying issue: a lack of understanding of the Sharia, a lack of connection to Allah, weakness in faith. Right, these are the things that we want to address first and foremost before addressing the symptoms. Then the last one, which is probably the most comical of them, because it happens all the time, is the public areas, and he also adds the pathways, right? The public roads. So the roads and these public spaces are shared benefit and usage. They're of shared benefit and usage. So anything that one does that would violate others' ability or others' rights to that shared benefits and that shared usage, right, would be impermissible to do, or anything that would cause harm to other people. And the companions, they used to sit in the pathways and they would talk to each other because they didn't have really other places to gather. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, beware of sitting in the pathways. And they said, we don't really have anywhere else to meet up and talk. And he said that if you must sit in the pathways, then you have to give it its rights. Right? So even the pathways have rights. And they said, what are its rights? And he listed a few things. He said, lowering the gaze, withholding harm, not harming people, and commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Right? So all of these things are of this vein. So building extensions of a building onto a property that you do not own, or onto your neighbor's property. I know it's very common that someone wants to put up a fence in their house, but instead of putting the fence on their line, they put their fence on their neighbor's line so they get the full usage of their lawn. Right? No, you're not allowed to build on other people's property or even on public property without permission. And even to the extent that some of the companions were building their house a little bit high, and it was blocking the breeze into the window of their neighbor's house, and the Prophet ﷺ told them not to do it. Right? Now we have air conditioning and stuff like that, right? And there's certain things that are civil law and customary that may be permissible in the law, so that's a little bit different, but definitely not using the other person's property without their permission. Keeping objects or possessions on public property. This would restrict the walkways. It could cause potential harm to passers-by. Now, there's an exception, right? Limited time or a limited extent that is customary. So if you're moving, for instance, you have this giant 15-foot U-Haul truck because you're moving into a house, right? You're blocking the sidewalk. You're blocking even some of the road, right? But that's customarily understood that you need to do that. That's fine. But now you're parking your RV in 15 spots, right, outside your apartment building, right, and it's blocking other people's usage of that. Now the elderly people have to walk from far away and so forth. That would be impermissible. Tamam. Keeping one's riding animal tied at the public walkways. That causes impurities in the walkways. Now this book is hundreds of years old, so it took me a while to think of what would be the modern day scenario that would apply to this. So this is what I came up with, right? Take it or leave it, right? You can do Amr bil Ma'ruf on me as well. Improperly parked cars. There it is. I said it. Improperly parked cars. And Sheikh Yahya, he mentioned, may Allah preserve him and bless him, in the khutbah not too long ago about the Prophet saying that when you come to prayer, come with in a tranquil way with dignity, right? And do not hasten, do not rush. So he was mentioning people trying to catch the Jum'ah prayer, and then they're cutting people off, they're breaking the traffic laws, right? And they're doing all these things, and then they screech into the masjid and they park in some sort of catty corner direction, right? And now they're taking 3 spots, and no one else. Right? So and in order to achieve the sunnah of coming to Jum'ah at a certain time earlier, right? They've committed 4 or 5 harams on the way, right? Let alone the non-Muslims are like, man, these Muslims, right? Every Friday I get it cut off by some sort of Muslim. Walking, well, most Muslims don't have dogs, but if someone had a dog or something like that and they didn't pick up after them, the dog defecated in someone else's yard, this would be an example like that. Or if I don't know if anyone's walking their sheep, right? But quite a few people here have sheep in the community. Throwing dirty or filthy things in public spaces, so littering. Right, littering is illegal and is also sinful in the sacred law, especially if it's something that would cause harm to people. Now, if it's compost and it's put in a place that is not going to affect other people, it may still be illegal. Right? So don't go to the cop and say, sorry, it's jaiz. So it may still be illegal, but Islamically, it's a little hard to say that it's sinful. And then he mentions about people improperly dressed or in public spaces and stuff. This is a little hard because most of the people around are not Muslim, so they're not obliged to follow this. There's a civil law. There is such thing as indecent exposure, right? And that does exist. But our requirements of modesty are much higher than the civil law. I remember being in some Muslim countries, and there was a lot of internet cafes. Right? And unfortunately, there's Muslim-owned internet cafes in a Muslim community, in a Muslim country, with an Islamic environment, masjids around, everything, and people are watching pornographic content right there in the store. And the owner is allowing it. Right? So that is definitely a scenario where someone has to speak to that owner. Right, and the other person, obviously, but especially the owner for even allowing that to happen. A lot of times, people only do haram because it's possible, because it's available, or because it's right. Whereas if there was preventatives and blocks, people would be less likely to do that. He mentions spoiling or causing public or private owned water sources to become impure. Right, so and on a personal level, most people can't really affect the local water system, but on a business level or a company level, right, dumping sewage in the water systems, right, is haram, and illegal as well. And you can see many examples throughout America where the water system, right, the public water is poisonous. In many places, still, even years after it's been discovered. Wasting public resources would also fall under this. I know sometimes during droughts, they may put restrictions civilly that you can't water your lawn or wash your cars because of the drought. There's 2 more. He says, destruction of public property. Now, this is the most dangerous. Because any of these other wrongs, it can be rectified, and you could ask for forgiveness. Right? You could ask the person, I'm sorry, I built my shed directly on your lawn, right? And and even though you've told me I've left it there for 10 years, I'm sorry, right? You can rectify that, right? But when it comes to public property, there is no one person to ask forgiveness from. And you can't ask forgiveness for the entire community, the entire city. Right, so destruction of public property is one of the biggest sins that is very scary because it violates a lot of people's rights. And Imam Ghazali talks about when you violate someone's rights that you have to rectify that as part of your tawbah. And he says that if it's not possible to rectify it because that person has already passed away or you don't know who it is, then you better do a lot of good deeds, getting ready for some of them or many of them to be taken by that person on the Day of Judgment. It's very scary. It's one of the scariest parts of the Iḥyā. And this applies to public property very much, because there's no way for you to know who are all the people affected. So vandalism or destruction, especially like the subways, the buses, the roads, community centers, etc. Now, even worse than that is something that is a waqf, a public property that is an endowment for the sake of Allah, like a masjid. Right? So wasting masjid materials, breaking things in the masjid. Obviously, if it's an accident and the chair breaks, but there's somehow a miraculous level of chairs breaking and tables breaking here. But in general, masjid property is not just public. It belongs to Allah. Right? In the sacred law, it's considered belonging to Allah. Inna al-Masajid lillah. The masajid belong to Allah. Right? So it is even more, because it's not only affecting other people, but it's also a violation of that sanctity. And that even applies to just wasting, right? So if someone, instead of using one paper towel, they use 45, then that is definitely wasting. And then he just adds, having anything dangerous that someone may be injured on or in public areas. So like your unsalted or unshoveled sidewalks, right? In some areas, it's actually part of the law that you're responsible for that. And if that harms somebody else, then even in a sharia sense, you would be responsible for that. Someone had branches under a tree or something hanging down into the streets and so forth. Other than that, he mentioned some general things, or that's really what he mentions. I added some general things. We can just list them. And some of these, a couple of friends of mine, he just chimed in and they added some. Checking other people's mail, apparently that's a thing. Right? Loud music and partying, right? So you got your Maher Zain on full blast, right? And your neighbor is trying to sleep. But because it's Ramadan, you've become nocturnal now. So now there's, right, with the exception is what's customarily allowed, right? And what is with permission. Right? So you have a family reunion or something like that, and you tell your neighbors in advance, like, look, there's going to be a lot of cars parked here. It's just going to be for one day. I hope that's okay. Right? Then that's the kind of akhlaq that the Muslim should have. Stealing other people's internet, their Wi-Fi, even if it's unlocked, right? Because they're now if it's locked, it's even worse, because that's theft. Feeding birds and animals such that they all gather on someone else's property, right? And they may do what they do after eating. I remember my Subway tuna sandwich got stolen by a pigeon, a seagull, because some lady decided that she wanted to be generous to all the seagulls. So these things affect other people. And then some akhlaq issues, right? Disrespect. If you see somebody speaking disrespectfully to elders, right? You see somebody being unnecessarily harsh to children. You see somebody yelling at a convert or a new Muslim because they didn't come in the masjid in the way that that person assumed they should come in. Right? That's the worst of all, because people have left the religion because of these things. They take one step in the masjid. I remember, just true story, and we'll close with this. I think we're a little bit over. I had a friend that he was a staunch atheist. He was adopted, but raised by a Jewish family, but he himself was a staunch atheist and would argue with me for years and years. He would find all the anti-Islamic documentaries and make me sit down and watch them, and then pause it. What do you got to say about that? Pause it. What do you got to say about that? For like 2 years straight. And then near the end of those 2 years, he said he wanted to go to the masjid to see what it was like. So I brought him to the masjid, and immediately, as soon as we walked in, it was Ramadan time, I seen this guy, his eyes lit up, locked in on him, like there's a target almost. And he just started walking, like crossing safs. And I saw it from a distance. I shouldn't have left him unattended. So I went there. I immediately went over there, and he was already like in the beginning of his spiel about how 4 or 5 things that this person is doing is haram. As far as his clothing, he didn't have a hat or something like that. And I had said to the guy, because I didn't want my friend to also see the discord between Muslims, right? So I said to the person, "Atatakallam al-Arabiyya?" Right? Do you speak Arabic? And he said a little bit. Then I explained to him, this person hasn't even taken a shahada yet. Right? He's considering it, and his face went pale, completely changed. Right? And this is the lack of wisdom that makes people feel averse to coming to the masjid and these things. And this is not what's meant by forbidding the evil. That is the opposite of what's meant by forbidding the evil. That is not nasiha. That's ego. Right? That's not changing the good. That's just yelling out that something's bad. Sorry, changing the bad. So we must have a lot of wisdom, And I don't believe that the Prophet ﷺ ever censured anybody for doing anything except that he knew who that person was. He knew their name. He knew where they're from. He knew what level of religious practice and religious knowledge that they were. And then he intervened accordingly. Right? Sometimes people just don't know. Right? And to instead of teaching them, yell at them, it's not prophetic. Anyway, so that's really what we wanted to cover. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people who care about other people and care about other people's well-being, and that Allah give us wisdom and helping other people in their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and taking people from whatever stage they are to the next stage, and gradually helping them succeed in life. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us what we've done in the past, any harshness that we've done. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم الحمد لله رب العالمين.